Good evening. It is time for the NFL Week 12 edition of the Iman Report. It is Sunday, November 29th, and we are now only 5 weeks left in the NFL season as the season's winding down, but we've got COVID chaos going on, possibility of the NFL, really good chance it's looking like the NFL is going to have to play in a bubble for the playoffs. NFL is after this week, the NFL has started discussions of holding the postseason in local bubbles. We'll get more details probably in the next 5 weeks as we get closer to the playoffs. But of course, we will start off with tonight's game, the Chicago Bears against the Green Bay Packers. Packers steamrolled Chicago. This was a thorough domination. The vaunted Chicago defense could not stop Aaron Rodgers tonight. Aaron Rodgers, 21 for 29, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions. Aaron Jones, 90 yards running the ball. Jamal Williams, 73 yards rushing. If there was one thing Chicago finally did tonight is they finally were able to run the ball. David Montgomery quietly ran for over 100 yards tonight in this game. But Trubisky was not good at all tonight. 3 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, sacked 3 times. The sad part is, I think this is the end of the Mitch Trubisky era. Question is, do you go back to Nick Foles when he's healthy? Probably. Realistically, it's looking like Nick Foles is going to be the bridge quarterback going into next year, while Chicago goes out and drafts a quarterback. But tomorrow might be, Matt Nagy might be sweating tomorrow, as Nagy could lose his job tomorrow. We already had a coach get fired this weekend, 2 GMs getting fired. Could Matt Nagy be the next to be fired? He might not get fired tomorrow. If he gets fired tomorrow, it would be likely Chuck Pagano would take over as the interim head coach. If he is not fired, he is likely going to be fired at the end of the year. Along with GM Ryan Pace, I think Ryan Pace is about to be fired. I think at this point, Chicago's fading out of the race pretty quickly. Now that Chicago's got to worry about drafting a quarterback next year, it's becoming obvious that the team has quit on Matt Nagy. So I think you kind of cut your losses on this year. Hopefully we get Nick Foles back, but Trubisky was not the answer tonight. And I think this is the end of Mitch Trubisky in Chicago at this point. But as for Green Bay hanging on to the 2 seed at this point. Green Bay's kind of hoping at this point they get a slip up from the Saints at this point if they want to get the 1 seed. Saints have 1 less loss than the Packers. I think the Saints go on a bye next week. But Chicago now at 5-6. The Bears' remaining 5 games are against Detroit, who will be playing with an interim coach next week. Houston's been playing better as of late. Minnesota already has a win. They play Green Bay again at the end of the year. So, if I were to guess their final record at this point, it will be 8-8. The Packers pretty much have a cakewalk the rest of the year. The toughest game left for the Green Bay Packers is the Tennessee Titans right after Christmas on NBC. And we'll talk about the Titans here in a little bit later. So I think at this point you're going to see Green Bay finish around 12-4. I think at this point too, it is time. I think The MVP race is Aaron Rodgers to lose at this point. Rodgers playing at a great level this year. Then after that it might be Patrick Mahomes, but Rodgers playing at a great level. But for Chicago, at least at this point, it is on to 2021. 8-8's just not going to cut it for Matt Nagy. On to the Thursday games. We are going to go with the Lions and the Texans beating the Lions 41-25 in a game that ended up being Matt Patricia's last game as the head coach of the Detroit Lions, and the last game as with Bob Quinn being the GM in Detroit. Deshaun Watson was almost flawless in this game. 17 for 25, 318 passing yards, 4 touchdowns. And Houston just blew the doors off of Detroit in this game. Matthew Stafford, 28 for 42, 1 touchdown, 1 interception, 4 sacks. The Texans, this might be where I think Eric Bieniemy is going to end up. Eric Bieniemy and Deshaun Watson, I think Deshaun Watson will thrive under an Eric Bieniemy system. Houston's got the right quarterback to bring in Eric Bieniemy, so the pieces are in place where I think Houston will bounce back in 2021. As for Detroit, it is going to be a full rebuild. You got to tear this team down to the bolts. Sheila Ford did the right move by firing Matt Patricia and firing Bob Quinn. Now, the next step, they need to trade Matthew Stafford to a playoff team. Stafford has suffered enough in Detroit. Stafford deserves to go play for a contender next year. Who could be a potential head coach in Detroit? You've got 49ers defensive coordinator Robert Saleh. Colts defensive coordinator Matthew Eberflus. Could be 2 logical names to watch. You could also go with a retread who I think didn't get the fair share in New York, Todd Bowles. Todd Bowles is a guy who I think could get a second chance at head coach at some point. But at this point, Detroit needs culture change. Whereas the Texans' future, I think the Texans are one of those teams that's going to be roaring back in 2021. In Dallas, the Washington football team demolishes the Dallas Cowboys 41-16. And Alex Smith proving that he is not done yet as an NFL quarterback. Smith 19 for 26, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. Antonio Gibson runs it for over 115 yards. Andy Dalton was roughed up in this game. 1 interception, 3 sacks. Ezekiel Elliott was shut down in this game, and for all intents and purposes, Dallas's season is over. But as for Washington, I think this win combined with the injury to Daniel Jones today really could set up the Washington football team to make the playoffs. Their next 5 games are against, the schedule's not exactly the greatest for Washington. Pittsburgh, San Francisco, Seattle, Carolina, and Philadelphia. Those are the 5 games for Washington left. But that's 5 wins, and that might just be enough for Washington to make the playoffs. Dallas could probably go 1-4, 2. So that probably put them 4-12. I think at the very least, Mike Nolan's going to be gone, but it wouldn't be a total shock if Mike McCarthy is shown the door in Dallas after one season. Hopefully, for Dallas, they will likely franchise tag Dak Prescott and hope to retool for 2021. Though I have no confidence in Jerry Jones. In Buffalo today, in a very sloppy game in Buffalo, the Bills beat the Chargers 27-17. Herbert was sloppy, so was Josh Allen. Both quarterbacks were not all that wonderful. Singletary had a good day running the football for Buffalo. But this was a game where Buffalo just simply made less mistakes than the Chargers. Anthony Lynn coached this game to lose. Anthony Lynn is starting to look like a dead man walking in LA. The Chargers, this will be one of the better coaching vacancies come 2021, especially if they do bring in a defensive mind. This is where I think Robert Saleh is going to end up next year, or Matt Eberflus. They've got a pretty good offense as it is, but I think the defense could use some better coaching. But the LA Chargers deserve better. Justin Herbert deserves better. Justin Herbert's got a very bright future for the Chargers. But they just got to move on from Anthony Lynn after today's game. Anthony Lynn's seat is getting very toasty in LA. This win for Buffalo doesn't move the needle too much. Buffalo still firmly in the 3 seed at this point. In New England, the Patriots beat the Cardinals 20-17. The Patriots now at 5-6. Cardinals at 6-5. Kenyon Drake had an okay game, but the Patriots defense was able to shut down Kyler Murray in this game. But also Cam Newton did not have a good game at all. A 23.6 passer rating, 0 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. But the Patriots defense was good enough to beat the Cardinals. Cardinals have always had issues winning games in the Eastern time zone. But for the Patriots, I think it's time for them to consider going to Jarrett Stidham next week. See what they've got in Jarrett Stidham, and the Patriots would be fooling themselves to think if they're going to make the playoffs this year at this point. The Cardinals, yeah, right now they are the 7 seed, but the Cardinals could go either way at this point. Cardinals at 6-5. They get 2 games against the LA Rams. That I think will be a split. What's going to help the Cardinals is the fact they play New York and Philadelphia. Those will likely be wins, so that puts 3-1 right there. Now, I think the big game is going to be on December 27th between the Cardinals and the 49ers. That game could now all of a sudden could determine that 7th and final playoff seed. The 49ers, granted, they've had a lot of injuries, poor quarterback play, but some way, somehow, they are still in the playoffs at 5-6, in the race at 5-6. We're going to find out a lot about Arizona in these final 5 games. Kyler Murray has not exactly been great the last few weeks. Kyler's got to play better if the Cardinals want to be more than just a one and done team in the playoffs. New England, I think the playoffs are out of the question for the Patriots. But I do think the Patriots will be playing spoiler for either the Bills or the Dolphins here in December. In Miami, despite poor quarterback play out of Ryan Fitzpatrick today, the Dolphins beat the Jets 20-3. And Darnold is 5 games away from mercifully being liberated from Adam Gase. I don't think Darnold's a bad quarterback. I think we could see the same thing happen to Darnold that happened to Ryan Tannehill after leaving Adam Gase. I kind of would not be surprised to see Darnold back up Tannehill next year in Tennessee. That would not be a bad idea. Fitzpatrick, it was more Fitz tragic than Fitz magic today. But Dolphins are 7-4, so that doesn't matter. But at this point, it looks like Tua is the better quarterback between the two. They get Cincinnati next week. They're not going to really need Tua next week. But then the schedule is going to get tougher after Cincinnati. They get Kansas City. Then they get New England, Vegas, and Buffalo. Those final 4 games will determine if they are going to make the playoffs or not. And Dolphins and Raiders could be a really big game towards the holidays here. But they do need to the defense needs to play better next week. But realistically, they need to get Tua back. Tua is looking like at this point, Tua is the better quarterback than Fitzpatrick. In Cincinnati, the Giants hold off the Bengals 19-17. Brendan Allen was not terrible in this game, but not great either. But for New York, I think the biggest loss for New York was losing Daniel Jones to a hamstring injury. Colt McCoy was not all that wonderful coming in relief. But they have found more of a running game in Wayne Gallman. Maybe rely on Wayne Gallman to run the ball more if McCoy has to play the next week. The G-Men schedule for the final 5 games, that's going to hurt. Next 4 games are against good teams. They get Seattle, Arizona, Cleveland, and Baltimore. That's a bit of a murderer's row for the Giants. That's the bad news. But they do finish off with the Dallas Cowboys on week 17. So there's still 5 wins. But hopefully Daniel Jones will not have to miss time with that hamstring injury. But it may not really matter at this point, as the next 4 games are games they're likely going to lose anyways. In Indianapolis, 45-26 Titans. Titans get a big win over the Colts. And now the Titans are back in first place at 8-3. Derrick Henry was able to run the ball over this vaunted Colts defense that went AWOL today. Phillip Rivers fell back to earth in this game. 2 touchdowns, 1 interception, 84.9 passer rating. And Tennessee did a good job stopping the Colts' run game today. And Tennessee back in first place. All's not lost for Indianapolis, though. Indianapolis only falls back to the wild card at this point. I think if the season were to end today, the Colts would be probably the 6th seed at this point going into the playoffs. They would either be the 6th or the 7th seed at this point. But the most important thing is the Titans have gotten back on track the last 2 weeks. And now the Titans are in the inside track to win the AFC South. Granted, the Titans are going to have 2 tough games in the last 5 games. They've got to play the Browns, the Jaguars, the Lions, the Packers, and then the Texans. Texans, week 17. I think Houston would love nothing more than to play spoiler for the Titans here on week 17. The big question for the Titans is, can the defense find its game? The Colts schedule is going to be no gimme going down the stretch either. They play the Texans twice. Houston would love to win one of these games and play spoiler for the Colts. They play Las Vegas, not an easy game. Pittsburgh, and then finish off with Jacksonville. So I kind of think the Colts will be a wild card team. But they need the defense to show up again, and maybe this was a bit of a letdown game after beating the Green Bay Packers last week for the Colts. The only penalty is now the Titans at this point. The Titans at this point will be the divisional winner, and the Colts are pretty much going for the wild card at this point. The Brownies find a way to beat the Jaguars 27-25. Out of a valiant effort out of Mike Glennon. 20 for 35, 235 passing yards. Baker, good job today. 19 for 29, 258 passing yards. Nick Chubb runs for 144 yards today. The Browns get their first winning season since 2007. Jacksonville falls to 1-10. After the game, Jacksonville fires Dave Caldwell as their GM and sadly makes Trent Baalke their interim GM. I worry about you, Jacksonville. Me being a 49ers fan, I know how bad of a GM Trent Baalke is. I hope he's not allowed to stay around full time as the GM, or you might be getting a lot of players with ACL tears in Jacksonville. But Cleveland right now is firmly in the 5 seed in the wild card at this point. In Minnesota, the Vikings pull off a last-minute touchdown to win the game. And don't look now that the Vikings are 1 game out of the wild card race at 5-6. Kirk Cousins had a great game today, 34 for 45, 307 passing yards, 3 touchdowns, no interceptions. Dalvin Cook was held in check. And this was despite having no Adam Thielen today. This is one of the games where Kirk Cousins earned his stripes. Mike Zimmer deserves credit for being a good head coach. Minnesota is not out of the playoff race, and Minnesota is just a game out of the wild card race at 5-6. Vikings schedule next few weeks: Jacksonville, Tampa, Chicago, New Orleans, Detroit, 3-2. Maybe that's enough, but that will probably get Minnesota to 8-8. That might just be good enough to clinch the 7 seed in the NFC wild card. As for Carolina, they don't get blown out in games. But Matt Rule has made the Panthers a much more competitive team in his first year as head coach. They'll be back in 2021. Maybe you go with PJ Walker next week, or for the rest of the year if Teddy Bridgewater keeps getting hurt. But I think next year you're going to see Carolina win these close games instead of lose them. Carolina could be that team next year that gets over the hump if all things go right for Matt Rule. In Las Vegas, the Atlanta Falcons destroy the Raiders 43-6. And this game was so bad that Derek Carr was mercy pulled for Nathan Peterman in the fourth quarter. Carr 22 for 34. 1 interception, sacked 3 times. Matt Ryan, 22 for 39. Ito Smith ran at 65 yards. Brian Hill, 55 rushing yards. Calvin Ridley with a touchdown today. But this was the best performance by Atlanta all year. And now Atlanta could be getting ready to remove the interim tag off of Raheem Morris. Atlanta has been 4-2 under Raheem Morris and should get strong consideration to be the full-time head coach in 2021. As for the Raiders, this is a game they couldn't afford to lose. And now the Raiders have dropped a game back in the wildcard race. And what's worse is that this might be the game that gets Paul Guenther fired in Las Vegas. John Gruden was not all that pleased after today's game, and a change at defensive coordinator could be coming sooner than later in Vegas after today. And the Raiders' schedule does not get any easier in the final 5 games. They get the Jets, and then Jets and Chargers should be wins. But they get Colts and Dolphins. So at best, I think they're a 9-7 team. That might simply just not be good enough in the AFC to make the playoffs at 9-7. And it's likely that Paul Guenther will pay the price. In Denver, a game without quarterbacks. Kendall hitting 1 for 9 as the Saints beat the Broncos 31-3. I guess the Saints wanted to give the Broncos 3 sympathy points. This was a game where the Broncos won it on defense. Latavius Murray 2 touchdowns. Taysom Hill 2 rushing touchdowns. Taysom at quarterback today fell back to earth. You could fault it to the altitude. Denver's defense did show up for a spell today. But Kendall hitting the emergency quarterback 1 for 9. 2 interceptions. A passer rating of 0. Royce Freeman ran it for 50 yards. Melvin Gordon, 31. Philip Lindsay for 20. I think this was the Broncos' punishment. This might serve them better than forfeiting. The Broncos should have just simply forfeited this game. But this game was even more punishment for the Broncos than a forfeit. As for the Saints, they might need to get Drew Brees back sooner than later, or they might want to consider starting Jameis next week. Taysom has been a mixed bag. Saints go to Atlanta next week. This could be a game where we could see both Taysom and Jameis in this game if Drew Brees is not ready to go. In LA, the San Francisco 49ers simply refuse to die as the 49ers beat the LA Rams 23-20 in a game where they get back Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson Jr. The bad news for Jared Goff is Richard Sherman was back. And Richard Sherman got an interception pretty early in the game from Jared Goff. Nick Mullins did not have the greatest of games at quarterback today. But it was all about Deebo Samuel today. Deebo, 133 receiving yards. I can't wait to see how this team looks like with Deebo and Ayuk, both starting next week. Sad part for the 49ers is, though, they're not going to be able to play their remaining 3 games at Levi Stadium. They're likely going to have to play at State Farm Stadium in Glendale due to the restrictions in place in Santa Clara County. As for the Rams, they are a playoff team. As of today, they are still the 5 seed because everybody below the Rams lost today. So all's not lost on the Rams just yet. But San Francisco just a game out. I think the game that could decide the 49ers' fate, whether they make the playoffs or not, could be Arizona in a few weeks. That could decide the 7 seed. But next week it's on to Buffalo for the 49ers. But for the Rams, Aaron Donald was good today. Cam Akers had a decent game too, so all's not lost to the Rams. The 49ers have just had the Rams' number this year. In Tampa Bay, the Buccaneers lose to the Chiefs 27-24. Patrick Mahomes almost throws for 500 yards today. 37 for 49, 3 touchdowns. Tom Brady had 2 picks, sacked once. But the big difference is you saw Bruce Arians take over the playbook with mixed results. To me, I think at this point there is a divide between Tom Brady and Bruce Arians. And if the Buccaneers are bounced after the first round of the playoffs, Tom Brady could get Bruce Arians fired. Then in comes Josh McDaniels. Ronald Jones needs to be the guy at running back going forward. Leonard Fournette is struggling too much. Tyreek Hill today put up video game numbers on the Buccaneers. 13 receptions for 269 yards. 3 touchdowns. Tampa Bay now 10-1. Now we go on to Week 13. Question is, will we see Week 18? Ravens keep getting positive cases of COVID-19, so I think there is a chance we could see Week 18 have to be installed if the Ravens cannot stop the positive cases. If the Ravens do play on Tuesday, it will likely be RG3. This game should be moved to Week 18. At this point, the NFL needs to be ready for Week 18 as we are going through a rise of cases, and we could see a lot more teams having to deal with cases as cases continue to rise here in America. But at this point, the NFL is finally starting to plan for a playoff bubble. Florida is likely going to be one of the bubbles since the Super Bowl is going to be held in Tampa. Texas is another state being discussed for a playoff bubble. We will talk about more of these developments as the bubble becomes more concrete in the coming weeks. Well, I hope everybody has a good night. Stay safe. Please mask up and have a good week here as we approach the month of December. I'll be back Wednesday night. Good night.